Hi, this is Matt Donegan from Challenger Stories. I'm here with Daniel. Daniel's the CEO of Crate2Plate, a vertical farming business. Daniel, tell me more about vertical farming.
Yeah, sure. So we farming can be done in a number of ways. I mean, the way that
Actually,
it's
sorry,
yeah,
I'm going to stop because I've messed that beginning up and I've led you into a bit of a dark corner. I'm going to start that recording again,
yeah,
and I'm going to ask you about Crate2Plate. Right, so
fine.
let's start again. Okay. Hi, this is Matt Donegan from Challenger Stories. I'm here with Daniel, who's the CEO of Crate2Plate, which is a start again. Hi, this is Matt Donegan from Challenger Stories. I'm here with Daniel, who's the CEO of Crate2Plate, which is a vertical farming business. Daniel, tell me about Crate2Plate. How did you guys start?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so we got started in 2020. It was sort of a memorable starting point because our very first farms at our site in Canary Wharf in London were installed in sort of late March 2020, about a week before the very first COVID lockdown, which is sort of quirky time to get started with anything, really. Just to taking a step back and explaining a little bit better what Crate2Plate does. We're an indoor vertical farming operation in London. We use a variety of different technologies and growing systems, mostly hydroponic technology, which is essentially a technology that allows you to grow without soil. So where instead nutrients are dissolved in water and distributed directly to the roots of the plants. So we use that type of tech to grow indoors in a fully controlled environment in which we control the temperature, humidity, lighting schedule, watering schedule, the exact nutrient mix that the plants get, pH level of the water that the plants get, allowing us to provide the optimum conditions for the plants and vegetables that we grow so that we can grow the highest quality version of them all year round with consistent quality and no seasonality. The vertical component, just to explain that, is just that because we grow in a fully controlled environment using LED lighting to replicate sunlight, we're not constrained by having one level on the ground. So we can kind of either have vertical growing walls or stacked horizontal levels inside the farm with LED lighting pointing at the canopy of crops at any given point any particular point in the farm.
Yeah. Okay. And so the benefits, I mean, it strikes me pretty much straight away that, and you mentioned it there, seasonality being one aspect. You're not at the whims of the weather system in the UK, which is obviously pretty challenging at times. And then you've got the consistency in nutrients. So they're the things that you flagged there. What does that do what benefit is there for the buyer, for your customer?
Yeah, there are a number of benefits that flow from the way that we do this. So the first of which, as you say, is because we control the environment, we not only don't suffer from seasonality, which brings it with it all sorts of issues. The fact that you don't know the consistency of crop quality isn't the same, therefore vegetable quality isn't the same, depending on the time of year. The price might not be consistent depending on the time of year, which is an important point for wholesalers and restaurants, which are a big part of our customer base. And the freshness and shelf life are also big aspects that traditional agriculture has to grapple with. Because we control the environment, we can put farms close to where where the food is consumed. So we can grow it close to where the consumer is. And so what that means is that we're able to deliver a product that has been harvested more recently, is therefore fresher, and has a longer shelf life. That's the kind of sort of basic benefit. In terms of the consumer experience, what growing in this way also allows us to do is to grow a product that is of a higher quality by virtually every metric that you care about as a consumer of food. It's got better flavor, aroma, texture, and in most cases, nutritional profile as well. There are a few reasons for that. Some of them are quite simply the product of being able to supply something that was harvested more recently. So just to explain, I mean, we all know that a product that has been sitting in your fridge, whether it's a herb or anything else, any kind of vegetable, for several days, it loses aroma, it loses flavor. These things, there is just a negative consequence that happens with time. So simply by being able to get a our leafy greens, our herbs, our mushrooms to the consumer shortly after harvest, we're able to deliver a better profile, a better flavor and aroma profile. But also, and this is the bit that people are less aware of, plants lose nutrient density with each passing day after harvest. So if you're having something that was harvested a week ago, it's actually less nutrient rich than if you'd eaten it a few days before. And so we're also able to deliver something more nutritious simply by virtue of being closer. Now, where we're able to get the quality dynamics right in terms of the pleasure of the consumer experience, that comes from other things. Because we grow in a controlled environment and without soil, we're able to grow completely pesticide free, and you also produce a very clean product. It doesn't have any kind of dirt or grit that you often get with vegetables and herbs that are grown in a field. I mean, sort of necessarily. And so it doesn't need to be washed in the same way. It's kind of and that also helps sort of preserve its flavor properties. But also, when you grow in a field using traditional agricultural methods, farmers, through no fault of their own, have to select crop varieties based on characteristics that have nothing to do with the consumer experience. They have to, for reasons of viability, select for robustness of crop, resilience against pests, resilience against disease, resistance to radical fluctuations in temperature, or excessive variations in rainfall. So, if you have a waterlogged field, you want a crop that is less likely to fully die across the field if that sort of thing happens. Those things have nothing to do with the enjoyment that you get from eating the product. Whereas, because we don't grapple with those external elements, we only select crop varieties based on flavor, aroma, texture, and nutritional profile. So it's there's a sort of much more of a straight line between that and what the consumer cares about when they eat it. And obviously, there's an important sustainability and sort of food security benefit that comes from this method as well, which is that we are seeing an increased prevalence of adverse climate events and shocks that make it harder to rely on crops that are grown in fields, that are grown in the ground. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had, in this country alone, 2 or 3 years, we've had significant sort of wipeout of, to pick a crop that we grow, lettuce, say, that is grown in this country for some of the year. We've had significant wipeout of that crop in a couple of years based on too high temperatures. Lettuce does not really survive well above, once you're getting into the mid 30s, and that's already well above what's optimal. But it can survive at higher than optimal temperatures. It just grows less well. But at some point, it won't survive anymore. And in one year, I forget which one it was, but it might have been 2 summers ago, where in 2023, though I could be getting that wrong, where we had an enormous amount of rainfall over a few days. There was some crazy statistic about how we had like a year's worth of rainfall in about 48 hours. And that level of waterlogging also kills a lot of crops. Crops like lettuce would have died in the field with that sort of thing. And so if you want to grow food in this country, not be at the mercy of imported produce to the same extent, we need to have more resilient and more reliable ways of doing that. And that's a part of what we deliver.
So, Daniel, just to summarize what you guys do, what Crate2Plate provide is you provide consistent, highly nutritious, predictable crops. You do that in
and very high quality. I'd always stress, I think that the people in our sector sometimes have a tendency to kind of, I don't want to say overemphasize, but slightly that, the agricultural component and the sort of supply chain benefits, while forgetting that this is still food. And actually, it's important to say that you're also getting delicious, and the flavor piece, for some reason, has often been ignored. But that's an important part of what we do.
Yeah. Now, I mean, look, the crops that we're provided in your average British supermarket have been, sometimes they seem to have had the flavour removed from them. I remember a day when strawberries actually used to taste nice and they were a soft fruit. Now, sometimes I cut into a strawberry and it feels like I'm cutting into an apple. It's that dense and it hasn't got the flavour anymore. And we see that.
You're absolutely right. And a part of that is the fact that we now expect to be able to buy essentially everything at all times of the year. I mean, you don't have to go back that many decades for people to remember that strawberries used to be seasonal in this country. They no longer are. There is no one in this country who accepts the idea that they can't buy strawberries on any given week of the year. But what that means is that we have, admittedly, kind of amazing global food supply chains that make that possible. But it does mean that for most of the year, you're getting stuff like soft fruit. You're getting it from perhaps South Africa or Kenya or Morocco, is almost necessarily a worse quality product by the time it gets to you.
Yeah. And you were saying about the nutrients and flavor actually diminishes. From my experience as a consumer, I know that if a food is older, it's not going to taste as good. Putting the nutrients to one side, which is obviously an important point. Let's talk about the industry. So I'm fascinated by this. I've seen, as I think many of us have, we've seen and heard about, or we've certainly heard about vertical farms. It sounds like it's really expensive in order to do it because the amount of real estate that's needed. And you said something very interesting at the beginning when you said when you first started out, your units were in Canary Wharf. Now that sounds like expensive real estate to me, but there's a massive upside, isn't there? Because of the distribution. So tell me about the sort of pros and cons of vertical farming then.
Yeah, it's a very good question. You've touched on a couple of different elements, shall we say. I'll first start with vertical farming more broadly and this cost question. It is definitely true to say that the costs surrounding vertical farming have historically not quite been, shall we say, people haven't quite got it right. Shall we say, there's been a sort of conventional wisdom in how you're supposed to go about these projects that in order to make it work, you have to spend an enormous amount of upfront capital on the initial capex needs to build the production facilities, and you have to build them very big straight away so that you can realize certain economies of scale and very quickly arrive at price parity with sort of more traditional wholesale markets. Now, that thesis has proved tricky to say the least. I think that too many players in our industry went too big too fast before really having proven models, and it's got a lot of them into trouble. So we've had a few kind of quite high profile sort of failures in our industry globally and bankruptcies that have come from them, including in the UK in the last few years. And my view is that a big part of that came from the fact that the people went too hard, too fast, and too big before really understanding what they were doing and where the market for what we're doing really sits. We've taken a different approach, and I wouldn't say that ours is unambiguously better. I would just say that it's been different, and I think it's left us in some senses a better position, which is that we started smaller. Much smaller, and try to really understand how to grow the things that we're growing very well, really focus on a premium quality positioning, which can get sacrificed when you go very big. It doesn't have to, but it does seem to have been the trend, is sort of when you're automatically targeting the most mass market, you have to be very focused on cost. And when you're kind of, more focused on that than anything else, the quality can suffer. And we didn't do that. We grew a higher quality product and found a smaller audience for the product that we were actually producing. And then have sort of opted instead to kind of expand in smaller increments, in more modular increments, and finding the appropriate demand for what we're offering. Of concentric circles that emanate from a quite premium audience, sort of, Michelin star restaurants in London, and expanding beyond that to more mass market audiences, but in slower, cautious steps. And right now, it is definitely true to say that the economics of vertical farming do not match on pure cost terms the economics of growing heads of lettuce in a field or growing herbs in Kenya and shipping them to the UK, which is where a lot of our stuff comes from. But I don't think that matters. I think that the two can coexist quite nicely for a time. And the cost profile of what we do is only getting better. It already has in the last few years, and it's getting better all the time. And I'm sort of building towards a quite near future, sort of as little as 5 years from now, when actually we bridge that gap. But in the meantime, the way to stay relevant and the way to stay viable is not to try to automatically replace all of the bagged salad that is stocked in Tesco or Sainsbury's, but instead to find a smaller, more appropriate audience for the product that we're actually able to deliver now, and work from there as we kind of improve our cost base, improve the price points that we're able to sell at without sacrificing quality, but therefore improving the mass market addressability of what we're offering.
Yeah, so you're delivering very specifically to a niche, not trying to go out and capture the mass market straight away.
That's how we started, yes. We're kind of already on that transition to having a more scalable and more mass market offering, but we've built to that very gradually. The way that we got started was by supplying the highest end restaurants in London and building that kind of relationship with chefs and restaurant owners, and indeed premium local grocery stores as well in London that we supply, to essentially build out the support for what we were doing, but also the vindication that actually people are prepared to buy this because this is a better product. It's like, and initially we had to find the customers that were ready to pay for quality, but now that offering is already opening up and we're able to kind of supply things at a better price to a more mass market audience.
Yeah. So every successful business out there starts with a bridgehead, starts with a way of locating its perfect target market, drilling into that, and then expanding from there. And at this point in time, you've done the really smart thing, which is identify who is valuable to you and who values you. I.e.,
exactly.
the value exchange is a very strong value exchange because your customers value the thing that you provide, and what you provide is consistent, high quality produce, fresh to their door, literally the day after it's been picked. I'm sure you could do it on the same day if you really wanted to. And that is going to have the right audience. It's a premium product currently. And as you say, if you run a good restaurant, then you're going to want the best. And that means that it's going to have to be sourced locally because otherwise it's got too much transit. It's going to be sustainable as well because of the way that you are farming and you're not bringing things in from South Africa, for instance, for seasonality. And so you've got a wonderful tasting product, packed full of nutrients, probably predictable price as well, I would have thought. So that's a joy to behold for your target customer. Absolutely. Is that right for the multiples at this moment in time? Possibly not until you get the right product in market going into those. And even then, it might not end up being the right one for you moving forward. But I mean, it sounds like you found your perfect bridgehead. Was that a long journey to find that, or was that scratching your head for long periods of time in a boardroom?
A bit of both, I would say. I think that that for starters, we had to find that even just discovering what it is that made people want to buy our product took a little time. When we first started, I thought, perhaps slightly romantically, that the sustainability story would resonate more than it does. It turns out, and perhaps intuitively not a surprise, you can't force people to care about sustainability. So you have to lean into the things that they do care about automatically and not kind of, sort of push uphill in the same way. So when we sell on quality. Say, here's our product. You should be interested in buying it because it's better. It's better than the thing you have now. And in case you care, it's also sustainably produced and there's a lovely locally sourced story. And some of our customers, in particular, some of the more sustainability minded restaurant customers that we have really do care. They actually walk the walk on this stuff. But most, to the extent that they care, they don't necessarily act on it. So you can't force it. So we had to find that narrative, and that took a little bit of time. And then the other thing was that over time, and this is something we've been working on a lot over the last 18 months, we sort of realized that there were other product areas that we could move into, complementary to what we do now, expand the proposition that we're able to offer to customers, and that includes our existing ones as well as new customer audiences like the consumer at home, but without deviating from the core proposition of the highest quality version of relatively simple things. If I could distill it down, that is probably what I'd say. Is what we like to do is to do simple things well. There's nothing that revolutionary about a head of lettuce or a mushroom or a jar of pesto, which I'll explain in a second. But if we're going to sell it, it's going to be a very good version of that thing.
Right.
So tying those things together, we started by growing lettuces, leafy greens, herbs, and microgreens. We've now expanded into mushroom production, which shares a lot of the key characteristics of what we are doing. The reason we've gone into it is that we're able to deliver it at a quality that we're satisfied with, that we feel is a quality that's differentiated. And we've also, in the last sort of 6 to 9 months or so, we've developed a range of sauces and dressings made using the stuff that we grow. So, we started with a basil pesto made using our basil. We have a few others where, again, we've just created and I incidentally cannot be the judge of that. People, listeners will have to, try our stuff and see if they like it and see if they agree with me. But the idea is that this is a higher quality version of a simple but good thing than what you can readily source at the supermarket.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So look, we've talked about the product. We've talked about what the beachhead was, how you're growing the company. What's been the big challenges along the way? In fact, what's been the single biggest challenge along the way?
That's a very good question. I would say that I know you've asked for one, but I'm going to offer two if that's okay.
You know.
The first of them, I would say, is finding matching that demand profile that I was describing to the product that we've got, and that was a difficult thing to realize. It took time, and then figuring out that actually, it is pointless to try and approach big supermarkets with our particular offering right now. It's not going to work for them, and it's not going to work for us. And so it's sort of the wrong one. So kind of once you realize that, finding who the correct customer is and how to approach them and how to build up that addressable market and tap into it is difficult. And it took us time to really understand that well and to put ourselves in a position to address it. And then the other thing that I would say is that one of the challenges that has been not specific to us, but I'd say certainly a feature of the industry, is that there has been a series of ups and downs in the industry that have affected the overall sort of PR backdrop and investor sentiment that surrounds what we do. So 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of hype and a lot of money going into this space, and a view that the money should go into things that are very overtly high tech, trying to do something very newer than what was perhaps necessary, and also put big money into big projects. And we weren't doing that. So kind of persuading investors and backers to put money into our project that was doing things a little bit differently was a challenge then. What's since happened is that a lot of those big projects have fallen by the wayside, some for reasons that we could have predicted 5 years ago, some for reasons that we perhaps couldn't have. And on the one hand, that sort of vindicates our approach. But on the other hand, all of that negative noise is hard to cut through. So even if you can talk to people in the industry, or whether it's commercial partners or investors, the sort of people that we need to kind of keep our project moving forward, and keep our mission moving forward. Even if you can go to them with a very coherent story that says we are not doing what has gone wrong, we are palpably different, the earth is still kind of scorched, and it's sometimes very difficult to cut through negative noise even if you've got the right message. And I'd say that's been a kind of consistent challenge that we've had to grapple with, in particular over the last 2 years.
It's somewhat ironic outlook in some ways, in that you are dealing with the legacy of a new industry. You are dealing with
Yes, yeah, well put.
people's perception of kind of the stuff that happened before in the past, because it is a really exciting area. I mean, when you think about what's happening with global warming, right? And, what we all understand, climate change is upon us, and we see it every day, and we're seeing freak weather events. And now we're hearing about farmers who are really suffering because their crops are failing, whether there's too much water at times or there's too little at others. The heats are rising. There's a lack of predictability. Even crops such as, I know in the south of France, the grape crops, the vineyards, they were really suffering, and now we're starting to see vineyards being planted in the north of England, in the likes of Derbyshire. You wouldn't
Yeah,
have thought that.
it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary what you see, and actually, I'm glad you bring up farmers, because actually, it gives me the opportunity to sort of address something up front, which is that we sometimes, as an industry, are, I won't say accused, but we're sort of, it is said of us that we're in conflict somehow with traditional farmers, and actually, I prefer not to see it that way. I see us as an ecosystem, and I think that we will be, so indoor vertical farming will be an important component of how the broader food production system gets addressed and gets fixed, frankly, because it doesn't work terribly well. And one of the ways that I believe that to be true, and that I think will play out in the long term, is that not everything can be grown indoors. Not everything can be grown in the way that we grow it. But and it is simultaneously true, if you grow everything outdoors in fields on arable land, soil suffers. It has suffered over generations of human history, where over-farmed land to service growing populations with methods that have been optimized for cost and yield, not for supporting nature, shall we say, has led to a worse quality of soil that's depleted of nutrients, that leads to lower quality crops. And that's a problem that's only going to get worse. So my view is that if you can take crops that don't need to be grown outdoors and you move them inside so that your field resources, your land resources, can be managed in a much more thoughtful and deliberate way, because you alleviate some of that pressure by moving certain things. You can improve how things are done in the field. You can improve the outlook and the opportunities for traditional arable farmers. And so I kind of view us as I think we need to be viewed actually as a single cohesive ecosystem, and not participants in it that are somehow working against each other.
Complementary, right? So it's like any ecosystem, they are complementary aspects of our overall landscape. So look, it's been both fascinating and challenging developing the business over the last few years. The challenges that you're facing now, I'm sure you're seeing cut through. You're seeing the benefits of making the right decisions. Is there a decision that you would have done differently? Is there a fork in the road that you wish you'd taken? Or are you you're perfectly happy with where you are? In other words, is there anything you would have done differently?
I think it would be abnormally unreflective to believe that there was nothing that we'd done wrong and that there's nothing that we would do differently. But it is a tricky question to answer, because so yes, there are lots of things actually that I, with hindsight, believe weren't the best way of doing things. But weirdly, we had to do them in order to know that they weren't the right thing. So I'll give probably the most meaningful example in terms of what we do. So when we set out, we started growing in repurposed 40-foot shipping containers, of which we have 10 spread across four of our sites in London. And when we started, I believed that the model in containers could scale by servicing hyper local community of customers that's sort of very local to the farms, and just building it up bit by bit with those systems. I no longer believe that to be true. Growing in that way enabled us to do was it allowed us to get started, to get certain key operating processes right, to understand our customer base at a scale that was big enough to be commercial, to be relevant, to allow us to land the types of customers that we have, which include serious household names, places like Fortnum & Mason, Hyde, Annabelle's in London, sort of really kind of the who's who of London hospitality. But at the same time, it was also small enough that we could learn from what didn't go exactly as we had hoped, decide the right way to expand that would be more cost effective and fundamentally more scalable, which incidentally is not in shipping containers. It's in slightly larger indoor environments retrofitted with the growing equipment that we use. And if I could go back with all the knowledge I'd have now, I probably would never have set up a shipping container. But that's a kind of almost facile thing to say. It's sort of, we only arrived at that conclusion because of how we did it. And I wouldn't say that it was universally problematic, because as I say, we had to build up a presence. We had to build up a customer base, a set of people prepared to advocate for what we do and prepared to buy the product that we're selling, in order to move to a place where actually we know the right way to, certainly my view, that we know the right way of doing this now in a way that is sustainable both environmentally and economically, while not sacrificing the core tenets of what we do, which is that we want to grow high quality food that is sustainably produced and isn't flown in from thousands of miles away, and basically give UK consumers that option.
Yeah. Okay. I'm fascinated by the business because I can see what kind of journey it's gone through. I'm fascinated by the industry because when I look at what's happening in the world today in terms of climate change, it strikes me that actually vertical farming or indoor farming in one way, shape, or form is going to be prevalent. Whether that's in 5 years or 10 years, it's required. We have specialist crops that we want to bring in. We're more tuned into movement of crops and goods. There's going to be pressure on that, and the lack of predictability for certain crops is really going to start to impact us. I can't see how it's not going to be a thing. How big a thing it'll be, we'll see through time and how it develops, but it's definitely developing. It's an absolutely fascinating area, and it's admirable that you guys are still standing because there's quite a few businesses in the sector that didn't make it through where you got to. If there's one place that you think you're going to be more prosperous than your predecessors, than your former competition, what do you think that'll be?
I would say that it'll be around developing a commercially viable model. And if I could pin that on one thing, it would be the fact that because we're a bit smaller and we're scaling more cautiously, for us to achieve a commercially viable model, we don't need to dominate market share, however you sort of define dominate. But there is, I think, a challenge that comes from being so big from the outset that you have to develop a dominant market share in order for your model to even make sense at all, let alone thrive. Whereas because we don't require, to become the supplier of 30% of Britain's vegetables for our model to work, gives us more options. And it makes it sort of easier for us to refine the model as we go and make sure that we keep building up with a focus on not just quality product, environmental sustainability, all of which are core passions of ours, but also with a sharp focus on commercial viability.
Yeah. So to be both commercially sustainable and environmentally sustainable, to be flexible and agile in the marketplace, to recognize where the opportunity is in the marketplace without doing that crazy thing of, so some businesses pivot so much they end up spinning around in circles. But you're not doing that. You're boxing.
We're trying not to.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. And it was interesting when you said about the sauces, about the pesto, for instance, earlier on. I thought actually that's a really smart move because I'm absolutely certain that your produce is going to taste fantastic. So fresh basil, most off the shelf pesto sauces have, they've been adulterated with not just the best ingredients. There's a lot of filler in that, as there always is in a lot of the food industry. So I think it's really interesting that you're being flexible like that as well. So look, one last question, and that is, if you were going to go back and start again in business, if you were an 18-year-old taking on your first company, what would you do? What would be your first steps that you would take?
That's a difficult question. I mean, I find I'm sort of also grappling with how pompous I find it to, in my mid-30s, be giving that level of advice while we're still kind of in the beginnings of building something that we hope to become successful. But it's a really large and difficult question, and it's almost two different versions of it. Like what I would advise myself to have done, when I was 18 years ago, is quite different to what I'd advise a modern day 18-year-old to do. And because on the one hand, pragmatically, let's just say, well, talking to someone who's 18 and sort of setting out now, I think that we're we're in an age where movements are happening very fast and changes are really, really significant in technology. A big part of that all happening within the last 3 years or so through developments in AI. And I think I would kind of advise, just in very basic terms, advise people to look at the magnitude of those changes and make decisions that have a decent chance of being future-proof against the backdrop of something so monumental that's shifting beneath our feet as we speak. Harder advice for me to have given myself, 18 years ago, but some version of that might still have been relevant, I suppose. Kind of consider what changes in technology are doing, what business models they're opening up, and what business models they're destroying. And through that lens, pick something that is going to be, sort of long-term future-proof, shall we say?
Yeah. Okay. So you probably advise your 18-year-old self to perhaps not get involved in the video rental market, for one.
For example, yeah. Yeah, that would have been an easy call, I think.
Yeah.
Easy call to make.
In retrospect, but there were some very smart people in that industry at one stage, and they turned there. And I think that's relevant for our conversation as well, because there's very smart people in every single industry. The ones that stick their fingers in the ear are the ones that don't last very long. And you're in an industry, or you're part of an industry which is going to be changing enormously. Whether that industry accepts that, whether it even understands what's happening. Climate change is affecting our ecosystem, and therefore food production and food security is at the heart of that. If that industry doesn't move, then something will go wrong. So when you look back and you think about the CEO of Nokia, when Nokia went under, went right down, and he said, well, we did nothing wrong. We did, because you didn't look at what was actually happening. So when I look at the industry that you're in, there has to be changes. There absolutely has to be. What we accept.
Actually, if I could suggest one lesson that we're learning, is that those changes don't have to be seismic, and in fact, probably shouldn't be if you want to effect actual change. People that try to kind of, sort of skip to the last page and achieve, all of the robotics improvements and all of the automation enhancements in one go, one fell swoop, have failed to do it. Whereas actually, if we're going to make changes to the food system, they're more likely to be gradual. And so focusing on sort of smaller steps is probably in the long run a better way to achieve actual change, even if it's a bit slower.
Yeah. Evolution, not revolution.
Quite. Yeah. Well put.
Yeah. I mean, look, Daniel, listen, thanks so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm really curious about this particular industry, because there's a societal change coming. There's an industry change coming. We have an environmental change which is happening. It's around us right now. Food security is going to be right at the heart of society's issues over the next decade, over the next 2 decades and onwards. You can see that there is a requirement for what you guys are doing, where it fits into our food security system, where it fits into consumer behavior, where it fits into industrial commercial behavior. We've yet to see. And I, for one, am going to keep a very, very close eye on it. Daniel, thank you so much. Daniel, CEO of Crate2Plate. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.